Before Christianity ever became a global religion, there was a moment in history where the life and words of Jesus were not yet controlled by any institution. There was no single official version, no single doctrine, no unified canon. There were many voices, many communities, many interpretations, and many written accounts. And in that early world there were gospels, not four, dozens. Some told a different Jesus. Some taught a different message. Some suggested a completely different structure of power. And some of these gospels would later be declared dangerous and erased almost completely from history. These are the lost gospels, the forbidden texts the early church fought to destroy. Because the real threat was not that they were absurd. The real threat was that they were plausible. And if they were accepted as true, Christianity would have developed into something unrecognizable today. This story begins not with Jesus himself, but with what happened after he was gone. For the first few generations after his death, the Jesus movement was scattered. It was not one unified church. It was dozens of independent teacher circles and philosophical communities spread across Judea, Egypt, Syria, Greece, and the Mediterranean. Each group held their own traditions, their own sayings, their own stories. They preserved memories and teachings in fragments, not yet locked into rigid doctrine. This is where the lost gospels lived, among scrolls, among secret oral lineages, among communities that believed Jesus spoke differently to the crowds than he spoke privately to those close to him. The public message was simple: love God, love others, do not fear death. But many believed there was also a private message, deeper, esoteric, hidden. And these secret teachings were never meant for the masses. The Gospel of Thomas reveals this most clearly. It does not tell a biography of Jesus. It is a book of pure sayings, no miracles, no narrative, no crucifixion, no resurrection scenes. Instead, it presents Jesus as a teacher of inner awakening, a revealer of hidden knowledge, a spiritual master telling human beings that the kingdom is already inside them if they learn to see it. This version of Jesus does not need priests. He does not need an institution. He does not need ritual. He teaches that truth is accessed directly, inside the self, without middlemen. A religion built on Thomas would have made every believer their own spiritual authority. That is the opposite of a centralized power structure. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene goes even further. In it, Mary is not a witness standing at the edge of the story. She is a direct transmitter of secret teachings from Jesus. She is depicted as the disciple who actually understood him. She challenges the male disciples who doubt her. She leads. She interprets. She carries the message forward. If that version of Christianity became dominant, the entire gender hierarchy of Western religion would have collapsed before it began. This gospel did not just question theology. It questioned who had the right to speak at all. The Gospel of Judas is even more destabilizing. It flips the narrative of betrayal. Judas is not a villain. He is the disciple selected by Jesus to trigger the final necessary sequence. He does not betray Jesus out of greed. He completes an assignment Jesus himself gives him. He becomes the only one who truly understood what Jesus was actually doing. If that version were accepted, then the entire foundation of the Christian morality story collapses. Good and evil lose their cartoon simplicity. The Passion story becomes a strategic metaphysical event, not a tragedy. These three Gospels each contain a version of Jesus that is incompatible with the political religion that later emerged. And that is the key. Because Christianity did not solidify through mystics and philosophers. It solidified through empire. When Rome entered the story, what Jesus meant became a political decision. When a government decides what a religion means, that religion stops being a spiritual search and becomes a tool. And once Rome unified Christianity under a single legal approved canon, everything that contradicted that official narrative was declared heresy and systematically erased. The lost Gospels were not just forgotten. They were targeted, burned, hidden, banned, removed from circulation, and in some cases, physically destroyed so thoroughly that historians only rediscovered fragments centuries later buried in desert caves. These Gospels were a threat, not because they were absurd, but because they revealed a version of Jesus that was ungovernable. The early church did not win because it had the most accurate version of Jesus. It won because it had the version that could be controlled. By the 4th century, the Roman Empire was collapsing under internal fractures, rival factions, and spiritual fragmentation. Christianity at that moment was not one thing. It was hundreds of competing interpretations, 1,000 different views of who Jesus really was and what he actually taught. Rome needed unity, not truth. Constantine did not convert because he was spiritually transformed. He converted because he needed a weapon strong enough to unify an empire. And suddenly the question was no longer, what did Jesus actually say? The question became, which version of Jesus helps Rome maintain order? The canon that eventually formed into the New Testament was not chosen because other Gospels were obviously false. They were chosen because those books created a religion that could be centralized, institutionalized, managed, taxed, structured, and controlled from the top down. A Jesus of personal inner revelation is unpredictable. A Jesus with no hierarchy is uncontrollable. A Jesus who gives power to individuals instead of institutions is dangerous. So those versions had to go. The Gospel of Thomas was suppressed because it removed any need for priests. The Gospel of Mary was suppressed because it shattered gender structure and authority. The Gospel of Judas was suppressed because it destroyed moral simplicity and demanded uncomfortable nuance. Rome needed a religion where obedience was rewarded, authority was unquestioned, and a small elite could interpret divine will for the masses. And so a committee of men decided which writings carried the voice of God, and which writings must be erased forever. This was not spiritual discernment. This was political filtration. The Council of Nicaea was not a gathering of mystical seekers. It was a government operation. And once the decision was made, history was rewritten. These lost Gospels were called dangerous, not because they were wrong, but because they made institutional religion unnecessary. This next part is important. The lost Gospels were never meant to die quietly. They were hunted. The men who preserved copies of these texts became fugitives. Entire libraries were burned to ash. Scrolls were hidden in clay jars underground in the desert because that was the only way to protect them from erasure. This was not theological debate. This was information warfare. Imagine a future where the entire world believes one version of history, not because it is true, but because every competing version was physically destroyed. That is Christianity's origin story. And this raises the central question of this entire documentary. If the truth was so obvious, why did the most powerful empire on earth need to silence every other voice? A religion confident in its origin does not fear alternate manuscripts. A religion built for control must eliminate them. Now we open the texts themselves, because the most dangerous part of the lost Gospels is not their existence. It is what they actually say. The Gospel of Thomas contains a line that changes everything. The kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, you will realize you are children of the living one. This is the exact opposite of institutional religion. This gospel tells you the divine is not owned by a church. It is not mediated by a priest. It is not granted by ritual. It is already inside you, which means no empire can monopolize salvation. Thomas turns spirituality into self-liberation. That alone is enough reason to destroy it. Then the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. In this gospel, Mary is not a supporting character. She is the interpreter. She is the transmitter. She is the disciple Jesus trusted with the secret teachings. Peter challenges her authority in this text because her voice threatens the hierarchy itself. Mary does not ask permission. She speaks as the one who actually understood Jesus. If this gospel became orthodoxy, women would have been leaders, teachers, and spiritual authorities from the very beginning. 2,000 years of gender hierarchy would look completely different. This is why Mary had to be erased. Then the Gospel of Judas. This gospel reveals Jesus speaking to Judas privately, not as a traitor, but as the only disciple strong enough to enact the final step. Here, Judas is the one who gets it, not Peter, not the others. In this version, Jesus is orchestrating something vast, something metaphysical, something strategic, and Judas completes the plan, not betrays it. This one gospel alone destroys the childish good versus evil cartoon the church needed to control the masses. Because if Judas is not a villain, and Jesus orchestrated his own death, then the core emotional manipulation tool of guilt, fear, and moral compliance collapses instantly. Imagine telling the entire Roman world that the man they call the villain was actually the only one who understood the truth. Rome could never allow that. So these gospels vanished, not because they were absurd, but because they were uncontrollable. History is not decided by truth. History is decided by whoever has the power to erase every version but their own. And that is why these lost gospels matter today. Because they show us what Christianity could have been. Before empire, before censorship, before doctrine, before control, they show us a Jesus of awakening, not obedience. They show us a Jesus who wanted to free minds, not build an institution. And maybe that is the real threat. Not that these gospels are false, but that they are too close to the truth. Now we arrive at the final question. What other history was rewritten? Before you ever had a chance to see the original version, this is Silent Shadows of History, where suppressed stories come back to life, and forbidden history refuses to stay dead. If you want more lost ancient knowledge, if you want the erased versions of the past, if you want the truth they spent centuries trying to bury, subscribe right now. Do not let these stories be erased again. Do not let the official version be the only version. Hit subscribe to Silent Shadows of History and force the truth back into the light.